Ambassador Elena Vasquez stepped off the transport shuttle and onto the docking bay of Concordia Prima. The massive space station stretched out in all directions, its corridors wide enough to accommodate the largest alien species in the galaxy. She had been here many times before, but today felt different. Today she wasn't coming for routine diplomatic talks or trade discussions. Today she had been summoned. The message had arrived at Earth's embassy 3 days ago. It was formal, cold, and left no room for refusal. The Galactic Council requested her immediate presence for a matter of urgent galactic importance. Elena knew what that meant. After 200 years of human expansion across the stars, someone had finally decided to do something about it. She walked through the gleaming halls, her footsteps echoing despite the sound, dampeners built into the floors. Alien beings of every shape and size moved past her, some nodding politely, others ignoring her completely. The humans were still newcomers here, barely a footnote in the galaxy's long history. Most species had been part of the galactic community for thousands of years before humans had even discovered fire. The council chambers were at the heart of the station. Elena had been inside many times, but always as an observer. Today she would stand in the center, facing the 12 most powerful beings in the galaxy. The doors, each one 50 feet tall, slid open silently as she approached. Inside, the chamber was darker than usual. 12 platforms surrounded a central speaking area, each one designed for a different species. On the highest platform sat Speaker Threnx, a crystalline being whose body caught and reflected light in patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly. Threnx's species, the Zephyrians, had been mediating galactic disputes for 50,000 years. To them, every problem had a solution. Every conflict had a compromise. Elena walked to the center of the chamber and waited. She had learned long ago that in galactic politics, patience was often more valuable than words. Speaker Threnx's voice came from everywhere at once, translated into perfect English by the station's computers. Ambassador Vasquez, thank you for coming so quickly. Thank you for having me, Speaker Threnx. How may I serve the council today? The crystalline being's form shifted, patterns of light dancing across its surface. Elena had studied Zephyrian body language enough to know this meant Threnx was choosing its words carefully. We must discuss a matter of great concern to the galactic community. Your species has been expanding at an unprecedented rate. In just 2 centuries, you have established colonies in 47 star systems. Elena nodded. That's correct. Humanity has been blessed with the drive to explore and settle new worlds. This expansion violates the galactic expansion protocols established long before your species achieved faster-than-light travel, rumbled Elder Korthak from his platform. The massive rock-like being had been part of the council for 20,000 years. His species had once controlled 100 systems before they learned the value of cooperation. With respect, Elder Korthak, Elena replied calmly. Humanity was not party to those protocols when they were established. We were not even aware of galactic civilization at that time. A new voice joined the conversation. It came from Counselor Zafari of the Keth hegemony, whose species looked like walking mantises but stood 12 feet tall. Ignorance of galactic law is not an excuse for breaking it, Ambassador. Every species must learn to live within the established order. Elena had expected this. She had studied the Council's history, their methods, their way of thinking. Every species that joined the galactic community went through the same process. First came the friendly contact, then the invitation to join the Council as a junior member. Then came the gradual absorption into the larger galactic culture, until the species' independence became just a memory. I understand your concern, Elena said. Perhaps you could explain exactly what protocols we have violated? Speaker Threnx's form brightened, clearly pleased that Elena was asking the right questions. For the next 12 hours, the council explained their position. They showed her star charts dating back millennia, detailed records of every species' expansion patterns, and examples of how conflicts had been resolved in the past. The message was clear. Humanity was expanding too fast, settling too many worlds and disrupting the careful balance that had kept the galaxy peaceful for thousands of years. Other species were becoming nervous. Some were asking why humans got to ignore rules that everyone else followed. Elena listened to every word, asked thoughtful questions, and took careful notes. She learned about expansion quotas, settlement permits, and the complex system of checks and balances that governed galactic civilization. It was impressive, really. The Council had created a system that prevented wars, managed resources efficiently, and kept hundreds of species working together. There was just one problem. It required every species to give up their independence. As the hours passed, the Council's true offer became clear. Humanity could join the galactic community as a junior member. They would be allowed to keep 7 of their 47 colonies, with the rest being redistributed to more established species who had been waiting patiently for expansion opportunities. Human military forces would be integrated into the Council's peacekeeping fleets. Human research and development would be shared with the galactic community for the greater good. In exchange, humanity would receive protection, trade opportunities, and access to technologies that would improve life on Earth and the remaining colonies. It was a generous offer, really. Most species received far less when they joined the Council. This is how every successful civilization has joined our community, Speaker Thranks explained, its crystalline form pulsing with warmth. Your species shows great promise, Ambassador. With proper guidance, humanity could contribute much to galactic civilization. Elena stood quietly for a long moment, considering everything she had heard. Around her, the 12 Council members waited patiently. They had done this hundreds of times before. They knew how it ended. Some species took longer to accept than others, but they all accepted eventually. The alternative was isolation, economic sanctions, and eventually, if necessary, military intervention. I appreciate the time you've taken to explain your position, Elena said finally. The Council's system is clearly well established and has brought peace to the galaxy for millennia. The Council members relaxed slightly. This was the part where the junior species began negotiating, trying to keep an extra colony here or there, asking for better terms, seeking compromises. It was all part of the process, however. Elena continued. I must respectfully decline your offer. The chamber fell silent, not the comfortable silence of beings waiting for translation, but the stunned silence of creatures who had just heard something impossible. Speaker Thranks's crystalline form flickered as if the patterns of light inside had been disrupted. I'm sorry, Thranks said finally. Could you repeat that? The translation systems may have malfunctioned. Elena smiled politely. The translation was correct, Speaker Thranks. Humanity appreciates your offer, but we must decline. We will not be surrendering our colonies or submitting to Council oversight. Elder Korthak leaned forward on his platform, his massive stone-like head tilting in confusion. You decline. But that's not... Species don't decline. They negotiate. They find acceptable terms. I understand this may be unusual, Elena replied, but humanity's position is firm. We established our colonies in unclaimed systems. We have harmed no one and threatened no one. We see no reason to change our current path. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the Council chambers were completely silent, except for the soft hum of the station's life support systems. 12 of the most powerful beings in the galaxy stared at a single human woman who had just done something that hadn't happened in 50,000 years. She had said no. Elena bowed politely to the Council. Thank you again for your time. If there's nothing else, I should return to my duties. She turned and walked toward the chamber doors, leaving 12 bewildered alien minds trying to process what had just happened. Behind her, she could hear the beginning of what would undoubtedly be a very long discussion. The galaxy was about to change, and it all started with one simple word. No. The silence in the Council chambers stretched for nearly a full minute after Elena left. Speaker Thranks's crystalline form had gone completely dim, something that hadn't happened in living memory. Around the chamber, the other Council members sat frozen in their own versions of shock. It was Elder Korthak who spoke first, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. Did that just happen? Councillor Zephyr's mantis-like head turned toward Speaker Thranks. The translation systems must have failed. No species simply says no to the Council. It's not possible. But Thranks's form was slowly beginning to glow again as the ancient being processed what had occurred. The translations were correct. I checked them myself 3 times during her speech. The human female clearly stated that her species declines our offer. But that makes no sense, interjected Commander Vex from the military platform. The reptilian warrior's scales had shifted to the deep red pattern that indicated extreme agitation. Do they not understand the consequences of refusal? Do they think this is some kind of negotiating tactic? The question hung in the air like smoke. None of them had any experience with this situation. The protocols, procedures, and precedents that had governed galactic civilization for millennia simply had no answer for a species that refused to participate. Perhaps we should recall her, suggested Minister Yalu of the Trade Federation. The blob-like creature's translator struggled with the concepts it was trying to express. We can explain more clearly what happens to species that remain outside the galactic community. What does happen? Asked Counselor Neth, the newest member of the council. Her species had joined only 3,000 years ago, and she still remembered stories from the time before. The question created another uncomfortable silence. The truth was, no species had ever refused to join. Some had negotiated harder than others, some had required more convincing, but in the end they all saw reason. They all understood that isolation meant death. We apply pressure, Commander Vex said finally. Economic sanctions, trade restrictions, diplomatic isolation. No species can survive alone in the galaxy. But what if that doesn't work? Counselor Neth pressed. It always works, Elder Korthak rumbled. It has to work. The alternative is chaos. 3 hours later, Elena was in her quarters aboard the human embassy ship when her communication system chimed. The message was from Speaker Thranks requesting another meeting. Elena read it twice, then contacted Earth for instructions. The response from Earth was simple. Maintain our position. No negotiations. When Elena returned to the council chambers the next day, she found a very different atmosphere. The 12 council members were clearly agitated, their various forms displaying signs of stress and confusion that she had learned to recognize over her years as a diplomat. Speaker Thranks's form was brighter than usual, patterns of light racing across its surface in complex spirals. Ambassador Vasquez, we have discussed your unusual response to our offer. We believe there may have been some misunderstanding. Elena took her place in the center of the chamber. I don't believe there was any misunderstanding, Speaker Thranks. Your offer was quite clear, as was our response. But surely you understand that what you're suggesting is impossible, Counselor Zafari said, her translated voice carrying a note of desperation. No civilization can exist outside the galactic community. The universe is too dangerous, too complex. Species need guidance, structure, protection. Humanity appreciates your concern for our welfare, Elena replied calmly. But we have survived quite well on our own so far. We see no reason to change that now. Commander Vex leaned forward on his platform, his scales now showing the black and red patterns of barely controlled anger. You speak of survival, but what do you know of the threats that exist beyond your small corner of space? Pirates, resource wars, ancient weapons left by extinct civilizations. The Council's protection is the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. Elena nodded respectfully. I'm sure the galaxy has many dangers, but humanity has faced dangers before. We've survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and environmental disasters. We've learned that we grow stronger by facing challenges, not by hiding from them. The chamber erupted into a cacophony of alien voices as several council members began speaking at once. The translation system struggled to keep up, producing a confusing mix of languages and concepts. Silence. Speaker Thranks's voice cut through the noise like a blade. The chamber fell quiet again, but Elena could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a storm. Ambassador, Thranks said carefully, perhaps you do not fully understand what you are choosing. Let me be very clear. If humanity refuses to join the galactic community, you will be alone. Completely alone. No trade, no protection, no assistance if you face disaster. Is this really what your species wants? Elena looked around the chamber at the 12 beings who had ruled the galaxy for longer than human civilization had existed. She could see the genuine confusion in their body language, the inability to comprehend that anyone would choose independence over security. Speaker Thranks, let me ask you a question, Elena said. When was the last time your species discovered something new? Not learned something from another council member, but actually discovered something that no one in the galaxy knew before. The crystalline being flickered in what Elena recognized as the Zephyrian equivalent of surprise. That is not relevant to this discussion. I think it is, Elena continued. Humanity has been in space for only 200 years, but in that time we've developed new forms of faster-than-light travel, created artificial gravity systems that work differently than anyone else's, and found ways to terraform planets that the Council declared impossible to colonize. We've done this because we had to figure things out for ourselves. Elder Korthak's massive form shifted on his platform. Such innovations are shared with the Council for the benefit of all species. That is how civilization advances. But who decides what innovations are worth pursuing? Who decides which research gets funding and which doesn't? From what I've observed, the Council tends to prefer improvements to existing systems rather than revolutionary new approaches. Stability is important, Minister Yalu bubbled from his platform. Revolutionary changes can be dangerous. The Council's oversight ensures that new technologies are safe and beneficial. Elena smiled. I'm sure it does. But humanity prefers to make those decisions for itself. Councillor Neth, who had been quiet during most of the discussion, suddenly spoke up. What if we offered better terms? More colonies, more autonomy? A faster path to full membership? The terms were never the issue, Councillor, Elena replied. The issue is the fundamental assumption that humanity needs someone else's permission to exist as we choose to exist. But every species needs guidance, Councillor Zephyri insisted. Every civilization benefits from the wisdom of older, more experienced cultures. This is how peace is maintained. Elena paused, considering her words carefully. What she said next would determine whether there was any possibility of avoiding the conflict she could see coming. Respected council members, she began, I have great respect for what you've accomplished here. You've created a system that has brought peace and stability to hundreds of worlds, but that system requires species to give up something fundamental, the right to determine their own destiny. Destiny is a luxury, Commander Vex growled. Survival is what matters. For humanity, they're the same thing, Elena replied. We would rather face the universe on our own terms and risk failure than accept safety at the cost of our freedom to choose our own path. Speaker Threnx's form had gone dim again, the patterns of light moving slowly across its surface like thoughts trying to form. This is unprecedented. In 50,000 years of galactic civilization, no species has ever chosen isolation over integration. Then perhaps it's time for something new, Elena said simply. The chamber fell silent once more, but this time Elena could sense something different in the air. Not just confusion and shock, but something that might have been fear. The Council had built their entire civilization on the assumption that every rational species would choose security over independence. Elena had just proved that assumption wrong. And if humanity could make that choice, who else might follow their example? The meeting ended without resolution, but Elena knew the real discussion was just beginning. As she left the chamber, she could already hear the urgent whispers starting behind her. The galaxy's oldest assumptions were being challenged, and the Council was about to discover how much their perfect system depended on nobody ever saying no. News of humanity's refusal spread through the galaxy faster than the speed of light. In diplomatic circles, trading posts, and military headquarters, the same conversation was happening in dozens of different languages. The humans had said no to the Council. On Zephyros Prime, the homeworld of Speaker Threnx's species, government officials were pulling archives that hadn't been accessed in thousands of years. They were looking for any precedent, any historical example of how to handle a species that refused integration. They found nothing. In the war rooms of the Skarathi Empire, Commander Vex's generals were already drawing up battle plans. Their species had built their reputation as the Council's enforcers, the ones who reminded stubborn civilizations why negotiation was preferable to conflict. They hadn't fought a real war in millennia, but they remembered how. On the commercial worlds of the Nexari Trade Federation, economists were running calculations. What would happen to galactic trade if other species followed humanity's example? What if the careful system of interdependence that had kept everyone in line suddenly fell apart? But perhaps the most interesting reactions were happening in places the Council rarely paid attention to. The homeworlds of the junior member species, the civilizations that had been integrated over the millennia. On Delton Prime, a group of young politicians were meeting in secret, discussing something that hadn't been spoken aloud in 3,000 years. Independence. The Delton Collective had been one of the more recent additions to the Council, and unlike many species, they still had elders who remembered life before integration. The humans actually said no, whispered Representative Kira, her blue-scaled hands trembling slightly. They just refused, and the Council couldn't do anything about it, added Representative Voss. They just sat there like children who had been told they couldn't have. Candy. The Deltans weren't the only ones talking. On Vorthon, the homeworld of the ancient Vorthon Confederation, old warriors were gathering in taverns, sharing stories their grandparents had told them about the days when their people ruled their own destiny. The Vorthons had been forced to join the council 8,000 years ago, after a devastating war with a neighboring species. They had been told it was for their own protection. Many of them had started to wonder if that was really true. Meanwhile, on Earth, Admiral Sarah Chen was in her office at Fleet Command, staring at reports from human intelligence services scattered across the galaxy. The news wasn't good. Council ships were moving, trade routes were being redirected, and diplomatic channels were being closed to human vessels. But there was other news too. Several junior council species had quietly reached out through back channels, asking questions about humanity's position, not offering support, not yet, but asking questions. And in the intelligence world, questions were often the first step toward something bigger. Her door chimed, and her aide announced that President Martinez was calling from Geneva. Sarah, the president's voice came through the secure channel. I've been getting reports from our embassies. The council is putting pressure on neutral species to cut ties with us. I've seen the same reports, Madam President. So far, most neutrals are taking a wait-and-see approach, but that could change quickly. Are we making a mistake here, Sarah? Elena's reports make it sound like the council genuinely believes they're protecting the galaxy. Maybe we should consider their offer. Admiral Chen leaned back in her chair, considering her words. She had been preparing for this conversation for months. Madam President, I've spent the last 5 years studying every council military action for the past millennium. Do you know what I found? Tell me. Every species that joined the council as a junior member gradually lost their military independence, their economic autonomy, and their political self-determination. The council doesn't create partnerships, it absorbs civilizations. The only question is how long the process takes. There was a long pause from Geneva. And if we fight? Then we might lose. But if we surrender, we definitely lose. President Martinez was quiet for another moment. Issue the order, Admiral. All colonies are to prepare for economic and diplomatic isolation. If the council wants to pressure us, we'll show them how humans respond to pressure. The order went out that same day, transmitted to every human colony, every exploration ship, every trading post and research station humanity had established across 47 star systems. The message was simple but clear. Humanity was standing firm. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. From New Terra to the mining colonies in the Kepler sector, the response was the same: defiance. Colonial governments began implementing contingency plans that had been developed years earlier. Trade agreements were activated with the few neutral species willing to deal with humans. Military reserves were called up and defense platforms came online. But it was the civilian response that truly surprised the galaxy. On colonies throughout human space, ordinary people were volunteering for emergency services, organizing supply drives, and converting civilian facilities for military use. Children were learning to operate emergency systems, and elderly colonists were sharing stories about Earth's history of resistance to tyranny. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. When the council applied pressure to other species, governments usually looked for ways to compromise. Among humans, pressure seemed to create the opposite effect. 3 months after Elena's refusal, the first real test came. The council imposed a complete trade embargo on humanity, forbidding any council member species from doing business with human colonies. They also revoked docking privileges at all council stations and began pressuring neutral species to do the same. The council expected this to bring humanity to its knees within weeks. Instead, something unexpected happened. Human colonies began trading more extensively with each other, developing supply chains and economic relationships that had never existed before. New industries appeared almost overnight as colonists found ways to produce goods they had previously imported. Research and development, freed from council oversight, began producing innovations at an unprecedented rate. Even more surprisingly, several neutral species quietly increased their trade with humanity. The Altarians, a peaceful species that had managed to remain independent for centuries through careful neutrality, actually opened new trade routes with human colonies. When asked why, their ambassador simply said, "We admire courage." The embargo was supposed to demonstrate human weakness, Instead, it revealed human strength, but the Council was far from finished. As the embargo failed to produce results, more aggressive voices began to dominate their discussions. Commander Vex's proposal for a demonstration of force was gaining support among species that had never previously favored military action. On Earth, intelligence services began reporting increased military activity in Council space. Ships were being moved, supplies were being stockpiled, and training exercises were becoming more frequent and more realistic. Admiral Chen called a meeting of her senior staff. "Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like diplomacy is about to give way to more direct methods. Are we ready?" General Thompson, head of Colonial Defense, nodded grimly. "Our defensive positions are as strong as we can make them with the time we've had. But Admiral, we're talking about fighting the entire galactic establishment. The numbers aren't in our favor. The numbers are never in favor of the defender, General, but we have advantages they don't expect." "Such as?" Admiral Chen smiled, but there was no humor in it. "They've been at peace for millennia. We've been preparing for war since the day we met them. As autumn turned to winter on Earth, the situation in space continued to deteriorate. Council fleets were conducting exercises dangerously close to human colonies. Diplomatic messages were becoming harsher and more threatening. And in the corridors of Concordia Prima, voices that had advocated patience were being shouted down by those calling for action. The final warning came in the form of an official council decree, transmitted to every human colony simultaneously. Humanity had 1 month to reconsider its position. After that, the council would be forced to take measures to protect galactic stability. Elena, still aboard the human embassy ship, received a personal message from Speaker Thranks. It was short and, in its own way, sad. "Ambassador Vasquez, my species has mediated conflicts for 50,000 years. We have never failed to find a peaceful solution. Please don't let humanity be the first. The galaxy needs peace more than it needs your independence." Elena's reply was equally short. "Speaker Thranks, humanity has fought for freedom for our entire history. We have never surrendered to tyranny, no matter how well-intentioned. Please don't let the Council be the first to try to change that." The month passed quickly. On human colonies throughout the galaxy, final preparations were being made. Families were being evacuated from forward positions, military units were taking their places, and civilian populations were moving into protected shelters. And on Earth, Admiral Chen was receiving reports that filled her with both pride and sadness. Every human colony, every outpost, every ship captain had sent the same message. They were ready to fight. The galaxy was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who has nothing left to lose except their freedom. And humanity had never been very 6 months after Ambassador Elena Vasquez had walked out of the council chambers. The galaxy's longest period of peace was about to end. The massive council fleet that emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the new Midway system was the largest military force assembled in over 10,000 years. 800 ships from 9 different species, led by the Skarathi Empire's most experienced war commander. The fleet included everything from massive Korthani dreadnoughts to swift Nexari attack corvettes. It was designed to be overwhelming, undeniable proof that resistance was futile. At its head was the inevitable, Commander Vex's personal warship and the pride of the Skarathi fleet. The ship was over 2 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that could shatter planets and shielded by technology that had been perfected over millennia of conquest. Commander Vex stood on his bridge, his scales showing the deep red patterns of satisfaction. This was what he had been bred for, what his species lived for. The Skarathi had not fought a real war in thousands of years, but they remembered. War was in their blood, their culture, their very DNA. "Range to the human colony?" he asked his weapons officer. 3 million kilometers in closing, Commander. Their defense fleet is moving to intercept." Vex's translator carried his amusement to the bridge crew. "Defense fleet? How many ships?" 214 vessels, Commander. Mixed classes, but all appear to be military." Vex's scales shifted to show patterns of contempt. 200 ships against 800. The mathematics were so obvious that this would hardly qualify as a real battle. Still, it would serve its purpose. After the humans were crushed here, the rest of their colonies would surrender without a fight. "Open a channel to the colonial government," Vex ordered. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the human command ship. The man who appeared on screen was wearing a simple military uniform with the rank insignia of a colonel. He looked calm, almost relaxed. "I am Commander Vex of the Skarathi Empire, acting on behalf of the Galactic Council," Vex announced formally. "You are in violation of galactic law and council authority. Surrender immediately and your colony will be occupied peacefully. Resist and face the consequences." The human officer nodded politely. "I'm Colonel Marcus Webb, commanding officer of New Midway's Defense Forces. You have entered human space without permission. You have 30 minutes to leave, or we will consider this an act of war." The Skarathi bridge fell silent. Then Vex began to laugh, a sound that his translator rendered as something like grinding metal. "Human, you face 800 warships with barely 200. Your vessels are smaller, older, and less advanced than ours. Are you insane or simply ignorant?" Colonel Webb's expression didn't change. 29 minutes, Commander." The channel closed. Vex stared at the blank screen for a moment, then turned to his tactical officer. "Are the humans' weapons even capable of damaging our ships?" "Unknown, Commander. Our intelligence on human military technology is limited. They have been remarkably secretive about their defensive capabilities." "It doesn't matter," Vex decided. "Even if they could hurt us, which is unlikely, they're outnumbered 4-1. This will be over quickly." What Commander Vex didn't know was that human military doctrine had been developed with one simple assumption: someday, humanity would have to fight a superior enemy. Every ship design, every tactical manual, every training program had been built around that reality. The human ships were smaller than council vessels, but they were also faster and more maneuverable. Where council ships were designed to look impressive and intimidate enemies into surrender, human ships were designed for one purpose: war. Colonel Webb stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching the council fleet approach. His ship was less than half the size of the Skarathi flagship, but it carried more firepower than most council dreadnoughts. Human military engineers had learned to pack enormous destructive capability into relatively small packages. "Tactical. What's your analysis?" Webb asked. "They're flying in traditional council formation, sir. Maximum visual impact but not optimized for actual combat. I don't think they expect us to fight. They're about to learn differently. Communications, send a message to Admiral Chen on Earth. Tell her the council just made their choice." "Message sent." "Sir." Webb looked around his bridge at the men and women who had volunteered to be humanity's first line of defense. They were scared, he could see it in their eyes, but they were also determined. They understood what was at stake. "All ships, this is Colonel Webb. In about 25 minutes, we're going to fight the first major space battle in 10,000 years. The enemy has more ships, better technology, and thousands of years of experience, but they have one disadvantage. They've never fought humans before." He paused, letting that sink in. "We're not fighting for territory or resources or political advantage. We're fighting for the right to remain free, for the right to make our own choices, follow our own path, and determine our own destiny. That's worth fighting for. That's worth dying for." The comm channel filled with acknowledgments from 200 ships, human voices calm and ready. As the council fleet closed to optimal firing range, Commander Vex was surprised to see that the human ships were not retreating. Instead, they were advancing in what appeared to be an attack formation. "Are they actually going to fight?" his tactical officer asked in disbelief. "Apparently so," Vex replied. "Very well. Let's give them a quick lesson in the reality of galactic power. All ships open fire." The space between the fleets erupted in light as 800 council ships unleashed their weapons simultaneously. Energy beams, particle cannons, and missile swarms filled the void, all targeted at the advancing human fleet. But the humans had been expecting this. Instead of meeting the attack head-on, their ships scattered in all directions, using their superior speed and maneuverability to avoid the worst of the barrage. Some ships were hit and damaged, but far fewer than Vex had expected, and then the humans returned fire. The first indication that this would not be the easy victory Vex had anticipated came when a Nexari heavy cruiser simply disappeared. One moment it was there, the next it was expanding debris and radiation. The human weapon that had destroyed it was unlike anything in the Council's experience. A focused particle beam that could punch through advanced shields and armor as if they were paper. "What was that?" Vex demanded. "Unknown weapon type, Commander. The energy signature doesn't match anything in our databases." More Council ships began to die. The humans were fighting like nothing the Council had ever seen, not in formations or following established tactical doctrine, but as individual predators, each ship captain making decisions based on opportunity and instinct. A group of human destroyers swarmed a Korthani dreadnought, their small size allowing them to get inside the massive ship's firing arcs. They attacked like wolves bringing down prey, targeting specific systems and weapons until the giant ship was helpless. But the most shocking moment came when Colonel Webb's Defiant engaged Commander Vex's Inevitable directly. The human ship was outnumbered by the Skarathi flagship's escort vessels, but Webb had spent years studying Council tactics. He knew exactly how they would respond. The Inevitable fired its main weapons at maximum range, expecting to destroy the smaller human ship with a single volley. Instead, the Defiant seemed to dance between the energy beams, its human crew reacting with reflexes that no Council species could match. The human ship closed to point-blank range and unleashed everything it had. New types of weapons that Council scientists had never imagined tore through the Inevitable's shields and armor. Vex's flagship, the pride of the Skarathi fleet, began to come apart. As emergency klaxons wailed and his bridge crew scrambled to contain the damage, Commander Vex finally understood what he was facing. These weren't just another species to be intimidated into submission. These were warriors who had been preparing for this fight their entire lives. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Council fleet was in full retreat, leaving behind the wreckage of nearly 300 ships. The human fleet had lost 67 vessels, but they had achieved something that had been thought impossible. They had defeated a Council military force. As the surviving Council ships jumped to hyperspace, Colonel Webb received a message from Earth. Admiral Chen's voice was tired but proud. "Well done, Colonel. You've just changed the course of galactic history." But Webb knew the victory had come at a terrible cost. Thousands of human sailors were dead, and this was just the beginning. The Council would be back, and next time they would be prepared for a real war. Still, as he looked at the surviving ships of his fleet, Webb felt something that the Council had tried to take away from humanity: hope. They had proven that the Council could be beaten. Now the question was whether they could survive the Council's response. Across the galaxy, news of the battle spread like wildfire. On worlds that had been part of the Council for millennia, populations that had never questioned their place in the galactic order began to whisper dangerous thoughts. If the humans could win, maybe others could too. The age of unquestioned Council authority was ending, and it had ended with the sound of human weapons firing in defense of human freedom. Good at losing that. The news of humanity's victory at New Midway reached Concordia Prima exactly 12 hours and 37 minutes after the battle ended. Speaker Threnx received the report while mediating a minor trade dispute between the Altarian Republic and the Talani Confederation, two neutral species that had somehow managed to remain independent for centuries. The crystalline being went completely dark for nearly 5 minutes, something that hadn't happened since the Great Plague of Zephyros Prime 30,000 years ago. When Threnx's form began to glow again, the patterns of light were unlike anything the other Council members had ever seen. "Is it true?" Elder Korthak rumbled from his platform. The ancient being's stone-like form seemed to have aged years in the past few hours. "Did the humans actually defeat a Council fleet?" "The tactical reports are undeniable," Threnx replied, his voice carrying harmonics of disbelief. "Commander Vex's fleet suffered 73% casualties. The humans lost approximately 30% of their forces." The chamber fell silent. 73% casualties. In a galaxy where wars were typically decided by whoever could demonstrate superior force without actually fighting, such numbers were almost incomprehensible. Counselor Zephyr's mantis-like form clicked nervously on her platform. "How is this possible? Our intelligence said human technology was inferior to ours." "Apparently our intelligence was wrong," Commander Vex's replacement, General Tharn, hissed from the military platform. Like all Skarathi, Tharn's scales were showing the black patterns of fury and shame. "The humans have been hiding their true capabilities. Their weapons are more advanced than anything we've seen, and their tactics are completely outside our experience." "More advanced than ours?" Minister Yalu bubbled in disbelief. "That's impossible. We've had civilization for millennia before they even discovered fire." "Age doesn't equal innovation," came a new voice from the back of the chamber. It was Counselor Neth of the Delton Collective, and her tone carried something that had rarely been heard in council chambers: criticism. "What did you say?" Elder Korthak demanded. Counselor Neth stood up on her platform, her blue-scaled form tense but determined. "I said that age doesn't equal innovation. When was the last time any of our species developed a truly new technology? When was the last time we solved a problem by thinking of something completely different instead of just improving what already existed?" The chamber erupted in angry voices as several council members began speaking at once. But Counselor Neth continued over the noise. "The humans have been independent for 2 centuries, and they've innovated more in that time than some of our species have in millennia. Maybe that's because they've had to think for themselves instead of relying on council guidance. That's enough." Speaker Thranx's voice cut through the argument. "We are not here to debate the merits of independence. We are here to decide how to respond to this unprecedented situation." But the damage was done. For the first time in recorded history, a council member had openly questioned the system that held their civilization together. And across the galaxy, other voices were beginning to ask the same questions. On Vorthan, the ancient homeworld of the Vorthan Confederation, General Karras received the news of humanity's victory while reviewing troop reports in his office. The old warrior had served the council faithfully for 3 centuries, but he still remembered the stories his grandfather had told him about the days when his people ruled their own destiny. That night, Karras called a meeting of senior Vorthan military officers. What they discussed was treason by council standards, but it was also something their people hadn't considered in 8,000 years: freedom. Similar meetings were happening on dozens of worlds. The Tau Collective, longtime rivals of the Nexari Trade Federation, began quietly withdrawing their ships from joint council operations. The Hanari Commonwealth, which had been forced to join the council after a resource crisis 2 millennia ago, started reopening closed mining operations without council approval. But perhaps the most significant development was happening on Delton Prime itself. 3 days after the battle, Representative Kira stood before the Delton Assembly and spoke words that hadn't been heard in their chambers for 3,000 years. "My fellow Deltons, we have served the council faithfully for millennia. We have contributed our resources, our labor, and our loyalty to the cause of galactic peace. But I ask you, what have we received in return? Are we truly partners in this great civilization, or are we simply subjects?" The assembly hall was packed beyond capacity, and Kira's words were being broadcast live across the Delton system. Citizens who had never questioned their place in the galactic order were suddenly asking themselves uncomfortable questions. "The humans were given the same choice we were given long ago," Kira continued. "Submit to council authority or face the consequences. But unlike us, they chose to fight. And they won." She paused, letting that reality sink in. "If they can choose their own path, why can't we?" Within a week, the Delton Assembly had voted to formally request independence from the council. It was the first such request in galactic history. The council's response was swift and predictable. The Deltons were reminded of their obligations, their debts to galactic civilization, and the chaos that would result if every species decided to go their own way. But the Deltons had a new answer to those arguments: ask the humans. The situation deteriorated rapidly. 3 more junior council species followed the Deltan example, formally requesting independence. Several others began ignoring council directives and making their own decisions about trade, military deployments, and resource allocation. Most troubling of all, from the council's perspective, was the growing communication between these rebellious species and humanity. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, still aboard her embassy ship, began receiving discreet messages from governments that had never spoken to humans before. 6 months after the Battle of New Midway, Elena received a formal invitation that changed everything. The Delton Collective, the Vorthan Confederation, and the Tau Commonwealth requested her presence at a meeting on the neutral world of Haven Station. Elena arrived to find representatives from 7 species, all of them junior council members who were questioning their place in the galactic order. The meeting was simple and brief, but its implications were enormous. They wanted to form an alliance. Not a rebellion against the council, they were careful to emphasize, but an association of species that chose independence over security. "We're calling it the Free Worlds Coalition," Representative Kira explained. An alliance based on mutual respect and voluntary cooperation, rather than hierarchical control. Elena looked around the room at the faces of beings whose species had been subjects of the Council for thousands of years. She saw fear in their expressions, but also something else. Hope. What exactly are you proposing? Helena asked. Recognition, answered General Karras of the Vorthons. The Council has made it clear that they consider independence to be a threat to galactic stability. We believe that independent species can work together for mutual benefit without surrendering our autonomy. And if the Council objects, then we'll deal with that together, Kira replied. The humans proved that the Council can be defeated militarily, but we believe that political and economic pressure might be even more effective. Elena thought carefully before responding. This was beyond her authority as an ambassador, but it was also an opportunity that might not come again. I'll need to consult with Earth, she said finally, but I think my government will be very interested in discussing this further. The response from Earth was enthusiastic. President Martinez and Admiral Chen both recognized that humanity couldn't stand alone against the entire galactic establishment forever. An alliance of independent worlds might be exactly what they needed. 3 months later, Elena Vasquez stood once again in the council chambers on Concordia Prima. But this time, she wasn't alone. Representatives from 8 species stood beside her, all of them carrying the same message. Speaker Thranx's crystalline form had grown dim over the past year, the patterns of light moving slowly and sadly across its surface. The ancient being looked older somehow, worn down by trying to hold together a system that was falling apart. Ambassador Vasquez, Thranx said quietly, you have returned? I have, Speaker Thranx, but not to negotiate humanity's surrender. I'm here to announce the formation of the Free Worlds Coalition, an alliance of independent species committed to mutual cooperation and respect. Elena gestured to her companions. We represent 12 worlds and over 2 billion citizens who have chosen freedom over security, independence over integration. This is madness, Elder Korthak rumbled. The galaxy cannot survive without central authority, without guidance, without the wisdom that comes from millennia of experience. With respect, Elder Korthak, Elena replied, we believe the galaxy can survive just fine. In fact, we believe it might thrive. She pulled out a datapad and activated a holographic display showing star charts, trade routes, and resource flows. In the years since New Midway, the independent worlds have increased their trade with each other by 400%. They've developed new technologies, established new colonies, and solved problems that the Council had declared unsolvable.